My name is Kaz Meyer. I've got the privilege, as was mentioned, of leading the Engineering Platform Innovation Group at Humana. Now, you may ask yourself, what exactly does that mean? And I'll tell you when I find out. What it functionally means is that I lead a few software engineering teams. I've got our DevOps platforms team, but irrespective of where they, what the product is that those folks work on, the direction of our team is to stay solely focused on the platform that we use to enable our software engineers to deliver business value. So full stack, DX, down to your Git repos, all the way up to self-service automations to help them do the things that they have to do that may not be writing code, which unfortunately in big companies, oftentimes there's a lot of those. So that's a little bit about me. That's what I'm doing now. I've been doing this digital transformation thing for a while. I mean, Lord knows, there's plenty of people that have made a lot of money off of the phrase digital transformation. And, I haven't made a lot, but I've made a little here and there. One of the things that I've seen, though, is that when we talk to, when I talk to folks that are at other large enterprises, when I look at my own experiences in those large enterprises, what I find is that there's very similar experiences to go around. You typically have this failure that nobody can really put their finger on for why those companies, those large companies, those enterprise, tend to fail to generate anywhere near the targeted ROI that gets sold as part of these cloud migration projects. Now, I want to be clear. Actually, we'll get to that in a second. In fact, I think BCG. So I don't know how many of y'all would consider yourself enterprise software engineers. Okay, so you're my people. You know a little bit about what I'm talking about here, probably to some degree. Y'all will recognize this. BCG, Boston Consulting Group. The whitest of the white shoe consulting firms they've shipped the stat, and we've all seen similar stats, that 70% of digital transformations fail. This is a kind of an indisputable fact, and frankly, it's common knowledge at this point. Everybody has heard for the last 5 years, 5+ years, the stories about the big company. They sign a big PS engagement or big multi-year committed spend deal with Microsoft or Google or whoever. They start moving things to the cloud, and all of a sudden the bill starts running up. The reliability starts going down, and then you inevitably hear, "Oh my goodness, this company, it's all over." At least they used to be all over like those CIO magazines and stuff. Company X comes back to the data center, and so that's not an uncommon thing to occur. So what we want to talk about is what I have observed to be the reasons why this happens, and then a little bit about how Temporal and applications or services like Temporal can reduce those risks and solve the hard problems of going to the cloud. So let's go ahead and unpack a couple terms real quick. Let's talk about, first, when I say enterprise cloud transformation, what does that mean? It's intentionally nebulous, first of all. I'm quite confident, but I'll tell you what I mean when I say it. So first, enterprise. We're talking big company, typically publicly traded, though not always. We're talking about an established legacy tech presence. So this is not a company that was born in the cloud. This is a company that has probably hired everything from like your hard hat and tone generator infrastructure type folks, all the way up to your modern web devs and everything in between. So they've been doing their own technology from the ground up for a long time. And then finally, when I talk about an enterprise cloud transformation, I'm usually talking about a company where its core business is not technology products. So these would be essentially everybody else who leverages technology in order to perform some other business function. So now that we've got that one out of the way, let's talk a little bit ROI. We'll move quick here because it's just an important distinction that I want to make. So as we think about return on investment with the cloud, I just want you to know I'm not just looking at financial return. This is, we all know that sometimes when you do the math, it doesn't make sense, but there are certain opportunity costs that you're able to avoid and other types of returns. So I just want to be clear, we're not talking about hard savings necessarily here, speed to market, all sorts of other reasons why people can be looking to go to the cloud. So let's talk about what does it look like when your typical enterprise decides, you know what, we are going to go to the cloud. So first thing that happens is your CIO is out playing golf one day, and he or she happens to be maybe playing golf with the right people or the wrong people, and they end up deciding, you know what, it's time for this company to go to the cloud. So what do? They go sell a big project, oftentimes all the way up to the board of directors. This is taking an immense amount of investment from a timing perspective, and so they have to make it a big, impactful project in order for it to warrant the level of attention that they're asking for. So, with that in mind, where does that money end up going? Let's say it's a happy day. They get all the funding gets approved. Hundreds of millions of dollars over the next 5 years gets set aside for this work. Where does that money end up going? Well, typically it ends up going into two places. One, it goes into your infrastructure. And by that I mean cloud infrastructure. This is where companies will spend thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars a month standing up Kubernetes clusters that nobody's deploying software to, or standing up all of this rigmarole with networking and all this virtualized security appliances and all that stuff, so that they can have their data center in the sky. Now, this happens really because we've gone through, we're kind of on the backside of the cloud being cloud adoption being a table stakes concept. So we've got these classical infrastructure people who are typically thinking about this from that classic infrastructure perspective. And in most big companies, a huge portion of your OpEx expenditures for that company usually flows through IT operations and infrastructure. And as with all things in all big companies, the bigger your budgetary control, the more power you have within that company. So we end up with senior leaders running cloud initiatives who are typically traditional-minded infrastructure folks. This is what you tend to see at big enterprise. So bringing that data center mentality up into the clouds, they end up reconstructing their data center. The problem is, as most people find out, is if you're trying to use the cloud as a colo, it's a damn expensive colo. Unfortunately, companies seem to find that out the hard way. So what's the second thing that they dump money into? Well, every big deal that I've been a part of with any of the major public cloud providers, there is always a massive amount of two things. One, professional services spend that gets rolled back into that contract. And then secondly, there's usually, and they'll frame it up different ways, but there's usually a big training component to that. Now, the training itself, we'll talk a little bit about what that amounts to and what it's worth in a little bit oftentimes. Where do we not spend money, though? Where we don't spend money is we don't spend money talking about and helping prepare our development communities for the actual hard problem of going to the cloud. Because what I will argue is that all of the cloud infrastructure, all of the how to do things in the cloud, those aren't the hard parts. Those are the easy parts. The hard parts are how does the way that you need to write your software, design your software, architect your software, how does it need to be different when you are writing applications that are going to possibly be distributed, across distances where latency starts to matter from a synchronicity perspective. So that's very different. Most enterprise software engineers have not had to think about that, or if they have, they've adopted these really gross overweight patterns to compensate for that, and you end up with grossly complicated systems then that are frankly operationally troublesome. So what ends up happening, we end up having the infrastructure exploding all over the place, like we talked about. The training that you get, it sounds good, but the reality is typically it's not going to get you what you need. It's going to be, how do I use G-Cloud to do this thing? How do I push something into an Azure function? It's going to be a lot of CSP specific stuff. You're going to spend a crap ton of money. I think you'll typically see deals announced in the hundreds of millions of dollars of committed spend over 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, whatever. But again, we're leaving out the software engineers. We're leaving out the hard part of a cloud migration, and that is again the fact that the way you write the software has to change. And so, what yielded this particular outcome? Well, I would argue that it's a confluence of three different occurrences. So one, all of a sudden you've got what used to be hidden complexity. You now have that being exposed. So what I mean by this is you've got your typical. There's a lot of cognitive offloading, let me put it that way. There's a lot of cognitive offloading that a software engineering team is able to do when they are writing relatively synchronous applications backed by a relational data store. They're able to do, we talk a whole lot about transactions when we're talking about this product, Temporal. Well, you know what? The database takes care of so much of the guarantees on those for them. It's safe. They can just trust that it's going to happen. And if it doesn't happen, it's going to fail in a very, very, very predictable way. All of a sudden, you get to a distributed system where you've got pub/sub topics all over the place. Maybe, God forbid, your company decided to go big into Kafka. Or you've built all of this very, very complex supporting infrastructure to try to accommodate these realities that the software needs to be different, but you don't do anything to get the developers ready. You don't get them to think how the software needs to be different. Instead, what we do is we take this complexity that we used to let the infrastructure solve for them and say, you know what, it doesn't solve for that anymore. You have to do that on your own. Oh, and by the way, every application team, you're all gonna have to solve the same sets of problems. Now, maybe you're a little bit more progressive on this front than many enterprises are, assuming that you're in an enterprise environment. Maybe you've built some reusable components. You've got kind of standardized ways of doing things within your company. But at the end of the day, you're still having to solve for complexity that you didn't have to use to solve for. The second major contributor to how this all goes wrong is really around broken process design. So I spend a lot of my time thinking about process. The reason being is that process, I don't know if y'all have heard the old joke, that process is organizational scar tissue. That essentially, every process that's defined in a large organization out there is there because something happened that caused it to need to be. Now, I used to hold that position myself. It was more than just a joke. But what I've learned over the last few years working at the Fortune 50 IT scale is that, but not at a technology company, is because that's a key differentiator or key difference. What I've learned is that the reality is big companies live or die on their processes, their business processes, their internal processes. And what I am convinced of at this point is that the way in which we go about running these cloud transformations, not just from a financial perspective, but also from a sequencing perspective, is flat out wrong. And we increase our likelihood of failure with the way we do it. And then finally, let's be real. Everybody talks about organizational change management. Nobody does organizational change management. Or if they do, it's a perfunctory sort of thing. It's a, we've got to give a whiff to this occurring. But oftentimes it's box checking, let's be honest. So with those things in mind, what do we need to do to avoid these pitfalls? So first, before you have to care about doing things the right way, you have to first care about not doing them the wrong way. We'll get to right eventually. Heck, I think Tiger Woods said this. I remember he was asked what was the key to your success as a professional golfer, and what he said was really interesting. He said, "I didn't win so many tournaments because I would go out there and play amazing golf. I won so many tournaments because I would go out there and play 4 rounds of solid golf. Everybody else would have a day where they blew up, but I wouldn't." And that's why he won so many tournaments. And so with that in mind, let's keep ourselves from going off the rails first. So one, we need to recognize the nature of the complexity that we're introducing into our software systems that we used to take care of at a more infrastructure-ish level. And we need to use the recognition of that to then inform the fact that our entire process is ass backwards for going to the cloud. We spend all of this time and investment in the cloud infrastructure layer, getting all these, PS engagements to help build it out, all of this training time from the vendors. But what happens, though, is that by the time we actually start getting applications to the public cloud environments that we've stood up, those dev teams are so far behind the ball that it becomes a mad rush, and you end up with applications that look a whole lot like they used to in the data center, and a lot of that marginal value that you could get from the cloud ends up being missed. And so what does that mean we should do differently? What that means is that we need to think about the software teams first. Recognize that that is the hard problem. Software architecture will always be harder than cloud infrastructure because the cloud infrastructure, you've got entire massive companies who have entire teams of people dedicated to productizing this in the easiest to consume way possible. And so remember that the hard part is the software development itself. And one thing that we know from process design is the fastest way to break a bottleneck, or at least understand and make sure that you have the proper flow in your process, is stick those bottlenecks at the front. And so with that in mind, you need to start working with your software engineers to help them understand what needs to change about their software so that they can effectively leverage the benefits of the cloud. You need to start that first before you start slinging Kubernetes clusters all over the place and signing that deal with Confluent, I guess, or sorry, I'm in a big anti-Kafka mood today for some reason. Just woke up that way. And then finally, you got to try to take the organizational change management aspect seriously. The reality is that in enterprise, you will oftentimes have engineers that are very, very good engineers. But what you won't oftentimes have are software engineers who are very open to change. In enterprise, we tend to look at something, a new framework, a new service. We see that as risk. And so the people that stick around in enterprise may be amazing engineers, and I've known quite a few of them over the course of my career, but you might find yourself a little change resistant, more so than you would in other contexts anyway. So you need to recognize that fact, and you need to bake it into your actual migration strategy. So moving on from that, I do want to talk a little bit more about change management. Now, by this I mean organizational change management, not the ridiculous, like, software bureaucrat things that other folks in companies typically have to do for managing, like, actual IT changes. For those of you that are in that enterprise environment, has anybody, and I really do want a show of hands, has anybody worked for a large company, and by that I mean, let's say Fortune 1000 up, Fortune 500 up, where you actually saw them execute on organizational change management well? One. Okay, so we got one. I think one, I'm glad, because you've kind of blown my theory that it's impossible. So thank you very much for that. But it is give me a little hope in the world now. But it's definitely not common. And so if it's not common, and we are trying to look at the world as it is, not as we wish it were, then we need to ask ourselves, if we know we're not going to do this well, what can we do instead? And this is where we cheat. Because if the system is designed, if the game is rigged, if you can't win otherwise, you cheat. And so that's what we do, and that to me is what's so exciting about Temporal and technologies like it, is that it enables you to externalize certain classes of problems that your software engineers used to be able to rely on the infrastructure for. Well, now they're able to rely on the infrastructure for that again. Maybe the infrastructure may look a little bit different, the way they interact with it may be a little bit different, but you have entire classes of problems that they used to be on the hook for when their CIO had that brilliant idea to go to the cloud. And they just woke up one day with these problems. Now we have an option to allow them to write truly cloud-native software, while at the same time giving them the ease and ergonomics that they're accustomed to writing software that runs in a traditional database. So, with that in mind, if you only remember a few things from this talk, I want you to remember this. One, let's be honest, if enterprise cloud can kind of suck sometimes. But I think it sucks not because it has to. I think it's just because big companies have a tendency to focus on the easy problem, for reasons, sometimes good reasons, sometimes not good reasons, but it's explainable, as we talked about earlier. But they end up leaving nothing left in the tank for the actual hard problem, so that by the time you get to actually trying to ship software, your poor dev teams have not been set up for success. Again, this is my great learning over the last few years is that you got to take your processes seriously, and you have to be particularly intentional about managing your bottlenecks. This kind of, you can go back to the old Toyota production system days, and I'm not going to sit up here and prattle on about all of that stuff, but the reality is lean thinking is a thing, and it's a thing for a reason. And so really thinking about how you go about delivering something, what that process looks like, and then optimizing that process for flow is a critical aspect of keeping yourself from finding a whole lot of money gone and not a lot to show for it. And then finally, be kind to your software engineers. At the end of the day, they're the ones that are building the products that are bringing the revenue in. Everything that we can do to help them be more effective, to help them be able to focus on business logic and not necessarily have to overcomplicate their lives, learning all about pub subtopics and how to build systems with pub subtopics and managing distributed state, and it's a mess for these folks. So let's just make it easy for them. Let's just give them a nice API surface that they can use. Let all of these problems be solved for them. Because frankly, it's not their job to think about these things. they need to be getting deep in their domain, deep in their business domain, understand the business problems, work super tight with their business partners to do that. And every minute we make them have to learn something about the cloud is a minute that we are taking away from their better understanding to serve their customers better. So that's kind of how I see it. This is why I got so excited about Temporal when I learned of it about 3 years ago, was I realized this is the missing piece for enterprise. I've been sitting here frustrated over and over and over again through all these enterprise transformations and realized that, okay, we've missed the whole big problem. But it became very, very clear to me that what we've got here is an opportunity to actually sidestep a lot of those problems. And so for those of y'all, who find yourselves currently in enterprise or end up there at some point in your careers, when people start talking about cloud and you start hearing those discussions, maybe it's a reboot, because the first 3 times didn't work. Maybe it's a net new because it happens to be one of those handful of companies that maybe haven't really done a meaningful cloud presence yet. But either way, think about these things and try to bring some of this thinking with you, because I guarantee that if you don't, you're going to struggle just like everybody else has to demonstrate that actual return on investment. And at the end of the day, you don't want to be the person that has to have the conversation with the board about where that $800 million went and what you've got to show for it or don't. So anyway, thank you all very much for your time. Thanks for letting me talk a little bit about my experiences with this. It's been a pleasure. One comment or one item, give a shout out for those of y'all who are interested, talking about how this framework can help simplify things for your software engineers. Check out Daniel's talk. I guess a little bit. What time is it, man? 1? Okay. Check out his talk at 1. He was telling me about it the other night, and it sounds really interesting and frankly, same sort of thing that we're talking about here. So anyway, thank you all again. And sorry about that. I didn't mean to.
No problem. Yeah, let's give it up again for Kaz for sharing those insights with us.